This is a recorded lecture for Chapter 19 in Physiology 230 A and P for the lymphatic system and the lymphoid organs and tissues. The lymphatic system consists of three major parts: a network of lymphatic vessels, we call lymphatics often, lymph, which is the sort of the blood flow, if you will, the blood of the lymph system, and then the lymph nodes, and that's the complicated aggregation of tissue that is at interspace locations throughout the lymphatic vessels. Lymphatic system, it functions, it returns interstitial fluid and leaked plasma proteins back to blood, and once the interstitial fluid enters the lymphatics, it's called lymph. Together with lymphoid organs and tissues, they provide the structural basis of the immune system, which we just talked about in the previous chapter. And this takes you through that process as you go through. This gives you that graphic, and we'll talk more about it. Lymphatic vessels are one-way systems, that is, lymph flows towards the heart, period. It's not a circulatory system. Lymph vessels or lymphatics include the lymphatic capillaries, the lymphatic collecting vessels, and the lymphatic trunks and the ducts. Lymphatic capillaries are similar to blood capillaries, except they're very permeable. They take up cell debris and pathogens and cancer cells. And the endothelial cells overlap to form a one-way mini-valve and are anchored by collagen filaments, which prevent the collapse of the capillaries. So they're a bit different in how they're put together. They're absent from bones, teeth, bone marrow, and the central nervous system. Lacteals are specialized lymph capillaries which are present only in the intestinal mucosa, and they're there to absorb the digested fat and deliver fatty lymph, chyle, if you will, or chyle, to the blood. We talk about the filaments anchored in the connective tissue. There's that endothelial cell, that flap-like mini-valve we talked about. There's the fibroblasts and that loose connective tissue, and you get kind of a feel for those lymphatic vessels, how they're blind into tubes. The lymphatic connective vessels are similar to veins, except they have thinner walls with more internal valves. They anastomose more frequently. That means they connect more frequently. They collecting vessels in the skin travel with superficial veins, so the lymphs will travel with the veins often. The deep tissues travel with arteries, so the vessels in the skin, the superficial veins, and the deep vessels travel with the arteries. And the nutrients are supplied from branching, what's called the vasa vasorum. Lymphatic trunks are formed by the union of the largest collecting ducts. They're paired. There's two in the lumbar area paired. There's a paired bronchiomediastinal lymphatic trunk. There's two in the subclavian. There's paired jugular trunks, and there's a single intestinal trunk. So it's interesting how it works. Lymph is delivered into one of two large ducts. The right lymphatic duct, which drains the right upper arm and right side of the head and thorax, and then the thoracic duct, which arises from the cisterna chyli and drains the rest of the body. It's really important to know that. So the right upper quadrant of the body is the right lymphatic duct. Everything else is the thoracic duct. Each empties lymph into the venous circulation at the junction of the internal jugular and the subclavian veins on its own side of the body. So it's important to know that. Here we go. There's the right lymphatic duct. You get that feel for where it's located. And then you get the thoracic duct, which is everything else. And you get a feeling for where that's at. There's that cisterna chyli we talked about. There's a thoracic duct. And you see where all that's located as you walk through that process in this graphic. This takes you through the steps by steps where the major lymphatic trunks are located and the ducts in relation to the veins and surrounding structures. The transport lymph is propelled by the pulsations of nearby arteries. There's contraction of smooth muscles of the walls of lymphatics, which also helps propel that. Lymphocytes are the main warriors of immune systems, and of course there are two main varieties that we talked about before. The T lymphocytes provide cellular immunity, and the B lymphocytes provide the humoral immunity. The T and B cells protect against antigens, foreign antigens, anything the body perceives as foreign, and that includes bacteria and their toxins and viruses or mismatched RBCs or cancer cells. The lymphocytes, we have T lymphocytes, which manage the immune response. They attack and destroy foreign cells. Primarily, they attack intracellular antigens. And we have B cells, which produce plasma cells, which secrete those antibodies we talked about, so they're humoral in response. The other lymphoid cells include macrophages, which phagocytize foreign substances and help activate those T cells. Dendritic cells, which capture antigens and deliver them to the lymph nodes to the T cells, so the T cells become activated. And then reticular cells, which produce a stroma that supports other cells in the lymphoid organs. We see the macrophages here in the electron microscopy, reticular cells and the reticular fibers. You see lymphocytes located here, medullary sinuses and the reticular fibers. So you get a feel for what it really looks like at the hypermicroscopic level. Lymphoid tissue houses and provides a proliferation site for lymphocytes, and it furnishes a surveillance vantage point. There are two main types of lymphoid tissue: diffuse lymphoid tissue and lymphatic follicles. Lymphoid tissue is diffuse lymphoid tissue, comprises scattered reticular tissue elements in every body organ, and they're larger collections than the lamina propria of the mucous membranes in the lymphoid organs. Lymphatic follicles or nodules are solid spherical bodies of tightly packed reticular elements and cells. They're a germinal center composed of dendritic and B cells, and they may form part of a larger lymphoid organ. Lymph nodes are principal lymphoid organs of the body. They're embedded in connective tissue in clusters along the lymphatic vessels, and they're near the body's surface in the inguinal, axillary, and cervical regions of the body. You can see them here, and you see the cervical nodes, the axillary nodes, the inguinal nodes as we talk about that. Lymph nodes function by filtering lymph, and so macrophages can destroy the microorganisms and debris, and it also helps with the immune system where lymphocytes are activated and mount an attack against those foreign antigens. Lymph nodes are bean-shaped. They externally have a fibrous capsule. Their trabeculae extend inward and divide the node into components. Trabeculae are little walls. And they have two histologically distinct sections or regions, the cortex and the medulla. Cortex being the outer portion, medulla being the central portion. The cortex contains follicles with germinal centers that are heavy with dividing B cells. The dendritic cells nearly encapsulate the follicles, and the deep cortex tissues houses the T cells in transit. T cells circulate continuously among the blood, the lymph nodes, and the lymphatic stream. This looks at a lymph node right here, and we're going to talk about this step by step as we go forward. The structure of the lymph node includes the medullary cords. They extend inwards from the cortex that contain the B cells, T cells, and plasma cells, and the lymph sinuses contain the macrophages. So see the follicles and the trabeculae, see the subcapsular sinus right here, the capsule proper, the medullary cords, and the medullary sinuses and the openings. The lymph, which enters via the afferent lymphatic vessels, travels through the large subcapsular sinuses and the smaller sinuses and extends the node, exits the node at the hilus via those efferent vessels. There are fewer efferent vessels, causing the flow of the lymph to kind of stagnate, and that allows the lymphs and the macrophages time to carry out the function that they're responsible for. So you have afferent fibers coming in, and you have several of those, and two efferent fibers or leaving fibers that leave each lymph node. The spleen is the largest lymphoid organ in the body. It's served by the splenic artery and vein, which enter and exit at the hilus of the spleen, and it functions as a site of lymphocyte proliferation and immune surveillance and response. So it helps to be a surveillance point for anything foreign and a response point. It also cleanses the blood of old blood cells and platelets and debris. And this is a really good picture of the spleen. Gross anatomically, this is a photograph of the spleen in its normal position in the abdominal cavity, and it's an anterior view. There's the diaphragm, top of the spleen. There's the spleen proper, the adrenal gland, which is located on top of the kidney. There's the left kidney. There's the splenic artery as it enters, and there's the pancreas sitting just below that. The spleen stores breakdown products of the red blood cells for later reuse, and it stores blood platelets. It's a site of fetal erythrocyte production, and it normally ceases after birth to produce red blood cells. It has a fibrous capsule and trabeculae also, and it contains lymphocytes, macrophages, and huge numbers of red blood cells, erythrocytes. Actually, a whole liter in the adults. It has two distinct areas, a white pulp around the central arteries, and most lymphocytes are on the reticular fibers are involved in immune functions, and red pulp in the venous sinuses and splenic cords. The red pulp is rich in macrophages for disposal of worn-out red blood cells and blood-borne pathogens. This talks about the capsule, and it looks at the white and the red pulp, and you get a feel for that based on this diagram. The next organ we'll talk about in the lymphatic system is the thymus and its size with age. In infants, it's found in the inferior neck and extends into the mediastinum, where it partially overlies the heart. It increases in size and is most active during childhood, but ultimately it stops growing during adolescence, then it gradually atrophies and is usually pretty much gone by the second decade of life. The thymic lobes contain an outer cortex and inner medulla, and the cortex contains densely packed lymphocytes and scattered macrophages. The medulla contains fewer lymphocytes, and the thymic Hassel's corpuscles are involved in the regulatory T-cell development that we talked about before. And there's the thymic Hassel's corpuscle, there's the medulla, and there's the cortex when we look at the thymus proper. The thymus differs from the other lymphoid organs in important ways. It functions strictly in T-cell maturation, and it does not directly fight antigens. The stroma of the thymus consists of star-shaped epithelial cells, which are not reticular fibers. These thymocytes provide the environment in which T lymphocytes become immunocompetent. The tonsils are the smallest lymphoid organs. They form a ring of lymphatic tissue around the pharynx. We have the palatine tonsils, which are located at the posterior end of the oral cavity, the lingual tonsils, which are grouped at the base of the tongue, the pharyngeal tonsils, which are in the posterior wall of the nasopharynx, and the tubal tonsils, which surround the openings of the auditory tubes in the pharynx. The tonsils contain follicles with germinal centers. They're not fully encapsulated, and the epithelial tissue overlying the tonsils masses invaginates or creates little openings or little caverns forming tonsillar crypts. The crypts trap and destroy bacteria and particulate matter, allowing us to become sensitized to certain infections. And so there's that crypt. You see a little invagination there, and it allows the bacteria to come in and allows the body's immune response to respond to the bacteria. So it's a sort of a testing center or a sensitizing center. We have aggregates of lymphoid follicles. We have what are called Peyer's patches, and they're clusters of lymphoid follicles which are located in the wall of the distal portion of the small intestine. Their small structures are also found in the appendix. Peyer's patches and the appendix destroy bacteria, preventing them from breaching the intestinal wall, and they help to generate those memory cells. So it's a place where we are become sensitized in a safer way to certain infection. You see lymphoid nodules here and the Peyer's patches, and you see the smooth muscles of the intestinal wall located there in this histology specimen. We also have MALT, which is mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue, including Peyer's patches, tonsils, and the appendix of the digestive tract, and the lymphoid nodules in the walls of bronchi in the respiratory tract. They help to protect the digestive and respiratory system from foreign matter. So, we've gone through the lymphatic system, lymphatic organs and tissues. This was a recorded session for Chapter 19. Thank you very much.